Hello everyone. I would like to welcome all of you to the side event, which will keep you busy and interested in the next 90 minutes. We will share quite some experience of multi-country projects and engagement of civil society actors on matters related to climate finance. I'm Sven Hamling. I work with CARE as the Global Policy Lead, Climate Change and Resilience, and I would like to very briefly introduce into the event those who are here at the COP itself, but also those who watch the event from afar. We would also like to thank the German government for hosting this pavilion, basically, and which allows us as civil society to host additional events. And we have a very busy panel, or actually we have two panels today, because we decided let's use the 90 minutes to present basically experience from a range of countries, but also from two different projects, basically. The first one is focused on civil society readiness in the Green Climate Fund context. And then we will have a change in the middle of the session to a second panel, which looks more into civil society engagement and multi-actor partnerships on climate and disaster risk finance. So don't be worried or don't be surprised if there's a bit of mobility here in the middle of the session. But with that, I would like to thank all of you for attending and look forward to an interesting session, and then over to the moderator of the first panel, Berta Agueta from German Watch.
Thank you, Sven, and thanks everyone for coming. As Sven has explained, we have a couple of panels. The first panels will be focusing on delivering climate finance to vulnerable communities and how engaging with governments and implementing entities in an effective green climate fund can help achieve that. So for that, we have a panel of experts from civil society who have been engaging with the GCF for many years in many different ways. And they will be sharing their experiences and their research on how to make the GCF work more effectively for local communities in developing countries. So without further ado, I would like to start with our first panelist, Emmanuel Sek from Enda Energy in Senegal. And Emmanuel, we would really like to hear from your experience of many years engaging with the GCF in Senegal. What role can civil society play in promoting projects and programs that integrate considerations of equity and climate justice and ensure that finance reaches the most vulnerable people and communities? So over to you.
Thank you very much, Berta. I will say that this is a huge challenge to have the resources gathered through the UNFCCC mechanism reaching the most vulnerable. If we refer in some literature or analysis made by some institutions, only 11% of the resources that we gather through the main mechanism, the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, go to directly the most who need it. We had opportunity to interact at the Senegal, in our country in Senegal, with the different institutions from the government that are dealing with the Green Climate Fund mechanism, particularly the National Designated Authority and some accredited entities to know exactly how communities, non-state actors could get resources from the Green Climate Fund. It's remained a challenge. However, we contribute to help them understanding the different mechanisms. And Senegal is one of the countries who I may say is getting advantage from the Green Climate Fund. If you look at the portfolio of Senegal, we have at most more than 10 projects. We have 4 projects from adaptation, 6 for mitigation, and we have at least 2 that are cross-cutting projects. And related to this project, we can see that the targeted of this project are really meeting the needs that is expressed by the communities. If you look at, for example, the restoration of salinized land, where women was advocating to revive rice growing, for example, in Joal, and the fund from the mechanism, the UNFCCC mechanism allowed them to establish an anti-salt dike who give the opportunities to reclaim more than 50 hectares of land to revive the rice growing. I think that this is a real impact that we expect from this process, and it's happened. If you look at, for example, another project related to urban flood management, where many people are affected, particularly households, and then to build some infrastructure that allow to drain the water. This is for us a great responses related to the disaster risk management in the urban areas. In many of our countries, particularly the least developing countries, you could see that more than 70% of the rural areas did not have access to electricity. And in Senegal, we have one project that is related to rural solar electrification that is looking to allow a mini-grid power for communities. And I think that this is also an answer that many of our people are expecting, because many households use firewood, or if they want to light their house, they use kerosene. And I think that having a project through the Green Climate Fund that answer to respond on this energy need is for us something that we need to promote. So to say that, yes, indeed, when I was coming here, I was discussing with one of my friends and said that we are discussing about finance without money in this process. We discussed a lot on finance, pledge, and something like that, but there is no enough resources that goes through the communities. And what could help to find, or to build the bridge is, I think, to rely on the localities. Because if you go through the localities, you will see that there are some mechanisms that may help to decentralize the funds. Why we should not promote this to allow localities and communities, particularly women association, to get these resources. It is possible. It is possible, but the process in which we are is too much country-driven. Let's have opportunity, give opportunity for localities, non-state actors to get more resources and to make more impact in the field. Because many initiatives happen in the field with a lot of impact going through the communities in terms of agriculture, in terms of agroforestry, in terms of land management. But the difficulties is to scale up this kind of initiative in terms of adaptation, but also in terms of mitigation. And at the end, sometimes we ask ourselves if really we want to deal with climate change in our localities, where we see that there are some responses given by the communities and also by the non-state actors. I think one of the main challenges is to scale up these kind of initiatives that are developed at the country level, but also to facilitate the acceptability of this project by the communities. The other issues is, for me, that the project that we gathered through the Green Climate Fund should be more integrated, because we find issues, some difficulties to make them sustainable. When the project ends, there is no follow-up. There is no follow-up of this project, and I think that to have more impact, it should be more integrated in the local plan or the local strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, and I hope to come back to you with some questions probably from the audience so that you can go deeper into those ideas. Yeah. But for now, I would like to move to my colleague Mirza Stolt from the Namibia Nature Foundation. She's the co-author of a recently published policy brief on locally led adaptation in the GCF, focusing on the portfolio for Africa. And I would like to ask her to share some of the findings of this locally led adaptation policy brief that she's recently published on, and also basically focus on the conclusions. What are the recommendations that civil society and your research can send to the GCF to ensure that the GCF is more responsive to the local needs in developing countries? So over to you.
Thank you so much, Bertha. So, as Bertha already mentioned, we looked at the Green Climate Fund portfolio across Africa, mainly for adaptation and cross-cutting projects, to see how much funding actually reaches the local level. So that's what we started out with. And I think what Emmanuel also already said, it's estimated to be, I think, 10 to 11% of global climate or adaptation finance that reaches the local level, although most projects claim to benefit the most vulnerable. And what we found, of course, we were only able to look at the project design, so we mainly looked at the funding proposal stage. It can, of course, look very, very different if you look at the implementation, but we found it very, very difficult with the information that is available to actually find out how much finance is flowing further down. And I think this is also a huge transparency and accountability concern that has to be addressed by the Green Climate Fund in the future. So in general, the findings were that the principles aren't very strongly reflected in most funding proposals, and there were considerable differences between different institutions, but also within different categories. So we, for example, looked at projects that were submitted by financial institutions, the different mechanisms that were used, and oftentimes private sector projects, projects by financial institutions, multi-country projects, and equity and loan projects did a lot worse in terms of locally led adaptation, and that's because they are somehow interconnected. So a lot of multi-country projects tend to be either using guarantees, equities, or loans, and they are often also presented by multi-country projects. And as such, that of course already creates some kind of conundrum, because you have to cover multiple countries, up to 18, I think. How do you make sure that it's really responsive to local needs? Just finding that out in the design stage is close to impossible. And I think in terms of recommendations, there were two main points that came out. The first one was that there's a clear need to mainstream the principles in order to enhance this kind of connection to the local level. And I think Emmanuel also already mentioned it, we are talking about country ownership, but country ownership often sits at a national level and often also very much at a government level. And there's a considerable need to include a diverse set of subnational stakeholders, also to guarantee the sustainability of projects. And in order to do this, this has to be mainstreamed into policies, it needs to be mainstreamed into guidelines. So it's all accredited entities to the Green Climate Fund are mandated to think about it and to implement it to some extent. And as already mentioned, that also requires a mindset shift away from seeing local people as beneficiaries, because they need to be part of the project, they need to be part of driving change, and they need to also be seen as agents of change. And this is something that needs to be acknowledged, and for that it needs to be part of policy. And what we did see is that principles that were policy already and that were mainstreamed into the different funding proposal templates and the like of the GCF performed a lot better. So it does seem, or policies seem to work. Requiring different accredited entities to do something seems to work. So I think endorsing the principles and mainstreaming it into how projects are designed and implemented would be a good first step. And then I think the Green Climate Fund is at a nice avenue where they're updating their strategic plan. They're currently busy revising their accreditation framework. And I think it's an ideal time to push for some of these considerations, that there is a need to actually channel financing and develop mechanisms or effective mechanisms that actually channel finance to the lowest level. And what we found as well in the paper is that there's a considerable trade-off between the speed of implementation, the scale of the project, and the impact. And more climate finance seems to be pushed towards very large private sector projects that can be quickly implemented, which of course favors financial institutions, it favors international access entities, and a lot of direct access entities performed a lot better, and they seem to have a lot more connection to the ground, which is of course also due to the nature of their organization. So direct access should be promoted. The Green Climate Fund should revise the enhanced direct access pilot, and I think there are a lot of lessons learned in that pilot that could be used as sort of a blueprint for direct access entities to submit projects under the simplified approval process, and then generally just require or oblige most accredited entity to take a more localized approach and move away from just making it a recommendation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mirza. That's very interesting. In the interest of time, I am going to move to Hawaida from CARE Egypt, who will introduce a little bit of the early experiences with the GCF implementation of projects in Egypt with a strong focus on adaptation. So she has a presentation, so we'll just move to that. Now, I hope you can see it. We can see it, but they cannot see it.
You cannot see it, yes. No problem.
Now-
Thank you so much, Bertha. Actually, I would like to share Egypt's experience with implementing the GCF projects. It started with just after releasing the financial instrument of the GCF. And we started by identifying the needs of the communities and the population in Egypt, and how to link between the climate rationale and the country-driven approach. And it was the projects that were submitted and approved were one on mitigation, which is concerned with integrating the renewable energy, and this is a huge project, and the other one is an adaptation project, and this is what I will talk about it. It is in line with the Egypt priorities and the NDCs as came in the Paris Agreement. This project is it is coming in line with the NDCs and the Egypt vision for 2030, and it is started in 2018 and will be completed by 2025. And the main implementing actor is the Ministry of Irrigation and Water Resources in Egypt. And the climate rationale behind this project is based on the fact that Egypt is one of the three hotspots that is the Nile Delta, and the North Coast is significantly vulnerable to the effects of the climate change, because the sea level rise, and also the flooding in the low-lying coastlines, and also the extreme events of the heavy storms that is also this area is vulnerable to. So the project idea built on this climate rationale, and as I told you, the country, and you can see in the photo that these are the hotspots that identified when Egypt started to do the scoping study of the coastal management, integrating the coast zone management approach. And they identified the 5 hotspots, 5 governorates that will be starting the work in. And you can see here on the photo that the risk and the disasters that these areas are vulnerable to. So after identifying the hotspots and the areas that significantly vulnerable to the effects of the sea level rise and the flooding, work done, and the project started by working on 2 objectives of reducing the vulnerability of people and coastal infrastructure by doing construction work, and also of integrating and developing a climate resilient integrated coastal zone management approach. And this is a plan for the whole north coast and of the region of Egypt. The construction work, almost 90% of the work done in the 5 governorates by building a natural-based solution like the fence made of nature palm tree, and also some of using the sand dunes to build the protection fence to protect the communities and the population from the the sea level rise. And also part of the work also started with raising awareness of the communities on the importance of being aware of the challenges and disasters that came from from the sea level rise and the flooding. So they started to be part of the change and the key change agent of the change made on the ground. And started also to work on the ideas of how to protect themselves from these shocks by working on building the construction work and using the nature-based solution to protect themselves. And also the part of the construction work that were done in this project is integrating or construction of rainfall drainage system so they can protect the communities and the population from the heavy rainfalls. These some photos from the nature-based solutions that used in this project. In some governorates, some women and men worked on working on this handmade fence made from the palm tree. And this is some of the ideas that provided, and it works very good in some governorates. And this also some of the nature-based solution that was also integrated and implemented in the project to protect the communities in the 5 hotspots area. For the development of the climate resilience integrated coastal management zone, this was started by implementing the scoping study and also started by building the capacity of the national stakeholder who will be, is the part of the integrating the resilience approach by building the capacity, providing assets, and also reducing the risks, and also create enabling environment for integrating the coastal management zone approach. Sorry, I'm returning back. These are some of the components that worked on the capacity building and the monitoring of the by establishing the early warning system and also the regulatory framework by creating enabling environment for integrating the system throughout alongside the Delta region. This is for CARE Egypt, our Egypt experience with implementing a GCF project. And also I would like to say here that the community and the population of the areas that implemented the project were the key change agent who participated in innovating the ideas of building the fences that used to protect them from the sea level rise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Huwaida.
Thank you.
I think we have a few minutes for questions. So if there are any questions, if someone wants to know a bit more about what our panelists have presented or discussed, I think there's a microphone. I mean, you can try, maybe we can hear you, but there's also a microphone in there behind you. Yeah, I mean, go to the microphone. I think it should work.
Hi, thank you. My name's Emily Litzes. I'm from the U.S. I go to school at Dartmouth and study policy and business. My question is, I've seen examples of climate finance being distributed to vulnerable communities, like with Belize, the idea of like a blue bond, where they get access to finance on the condition that they'll invest in reinforcing the stability of their coast, but they're not given like better capacity building supports. They're not given resources to actually build out that coastal protection network. And I'm just curious, like, when you talk about climate finance to vulnerable regions in particular, like, how are you addressing the capacity building?
So I think that's a question that's pertinent for everyone. So I will start with Emmanuel. I'll go with you, and then Huwaida in the order that we started, but please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so In our process, I mean, when we are interacting with localities, we provide them capacity because often if they are selected, for example, are executing entities to implement the project, they don't have enough fiduciary to manage enough capacities to even manage the resources they have. So we help them or we support them in leading or managing the resources they have, and even technically when they have, for example, to build or to interact with the different beneficiaries in terms of having some dialogue or organizing dialogue with the communities. So we contribute on that related to the project or the resources we have. But the issues of capacity is really key in this process, particularly the GCF, if it is related to fiduciary issues, but also in terms of reporting or monitoring the project they have to implement, and interacting with those who are not directly involved in the project, because we think that if it is in areas, we have to involve all those who are working, for example, on environmental issues.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Mircea, if you want to come in.
Yes. Well, I think you got a really good point there, and I think it's also one of the things we found as part of the papers. There are more and more facilities for local access of climate finance, of which many are not targeted at local stakeholders. But as soon as you try to go to the local level, it's difficult due to capacity building constraint. And I think in Namibia we do have a good example. We have a enhanced direct access project which was funded by the Green Climate Fund, which is actually a grant facility that provides funding to local communities for self-developed projects. And I think one of the key issues the accredited entities, the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia, found is exactly that. Who helps them to develop the proposals to access the facility and manage the funding? And I think the way they did it, they had quite a big capacity building component, but they also faced a number of challenges. And I think one of that is that governance support is becoming less and less. So I think that also comes with this trade-off between scale, impact, and speed. You want to push out solutions fast, but it takes time to build the governance systems. It takes time to get communities to a point where they can handle or effectively manage the finance that's all of a sudden flowing in. And I think it's very sad to see that a lot of this capacity building and governance support is getting smaller and smaller, and there's more and more focus on getting more finance to the local level, but they don't know how to handle it. And I think that's one of the key reasons why so little funding is flowing to the local level, is because we don't invest in their capacities and building the governance structures that are necessary to handle the money at that level.
Thanks.
Yes, I think also the capacity building in GCF is a key challenge, especially for engaging at the local level and for engaging civil society. I think part of the challenge is that the financial instrument of the GCF is not doesn't have a finance or a simple grant facility for civil society to build their capacities and to engage in the at the local level with participating and contributing to reduce the effects of the climate change or to build the resilience. One of the things that I really encourage, or the idea of for the readiness projects for each country, because in Egypt we have the readiness project for only building the capacity of the national designated authorities, the NDAs. So I think it's part of the problem is that the civil society is not part of these capacity building programs. They should be engaged in these programs and they be aware of what the change that need to be, how to be effectively contribute in the change and to be part of this readiness program.
Thanks you. So basically engaging other stakeholders beyond the national level of government, and also the very key issue of patient capital, which basically means actual change takes time, and the money should be there to match the time it takes to build this governance, to build these institutions, to create this capacity. I saw, so if you can move over there, we can hear you. And I think we have that time for that last question. So,
Hi, is this working?
Yes.
I think.
Perfect. Hi, thank you so much. My name is Michelle Benzing. I'm part of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom from the German section. I had a questions regarding gender, particularly because it was also called Gender Just Solutions. And I was just wondering, we have the Gender Action Plan, right? We have the GAP. But there's no finance mechanism behind it. And I was just wondering, when is the time to actually reallocate also finance, particularly for gender just solutions? Do you work with the GAP, for example? What would you need from the GAP, and what kind of finance mechanism could we perhaps establish? Thank you.
Thanks. So unfortunately, we lost our panelist on gender. There was a panelist that was supposed, and this is why you didn't hear. So we apologize for that. Yes. So. Do you want to address it first, a little bit in like 30 seconds, and then all of you? I think everyone has to so I'll give everyone like 40 seconds to add something on gender. I apologize, but the time is.
Yeah, I have raised some projects that are dealing with gender issues. The one I forgot to mention is related to the clean cooking, to how to promote the improved cook stove. And when we say improve cook stove, this helps to reduce the pressure on forest resources. And in another hand, it's also allowed to reduce the drudgery of women who are going far to collect firewood. So I think having some projects that are addressing women or gender issues is, for me, important to highlight and also to promote when the country come to design or to develop the project, to address really the needs or the expectation that the different members of communities, particularly women, are expecting. And this kind of project, the clean cooking, is for me a key one. And the other one is how to revive the rice growing that come from advocacy from women in Joal, for example, who was waiting to have anti-sulfur dye. So these are, for me, key responses that are given to address gender or women needs.
Thanks. I know you have some findings on gender that you might want to share real quick. I apologize, but
I think one of the main issues is that the gender policy often exists on paper. It's become a requirement, but people don't really consider the structural inequalities that come behind gender differences. And I think that's also where this normally severe underestimation of budget comes from for gender action plans and the like. I think it's similar to governance. It's a budget that's pushed. It's something where there's not enough funding allocated to, simply because you want more impactful finance without creating the enabling environment for it. And yes, what we found is, the gender policies are often not particularly good, or the action plans are not particularly good. They don't really consider gender aspects in all of their diversity. So it mainly looks at having segregated workshops or the number of women benefiting, but actually improving the situation, which can also be safety considerations or access to facilities and the like, is often not considered. And I think that's something that still has to be considerably strengthened. I do, however, thought the gender action plans were slightly better than some of the other reporting that's coming through on project progress. But I think you can tell there are individual institutions that are doing a real job simply because they really care about what they're doing. But I think in general, it's still very, very superficial. And I think that's where often also the gender action plans are considerably underfunded. And with this lack of flexibility in implementation, it's very difficult to try and remediate this as soon as you start implementation. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then, Howaida, you have the last word. So because we're going to get kicked out soon.
I second what Merja said. That the key issue is that we have for the proposal and for the design of the proposal, we have the gender assessment study and also the gender action plan, But implementing these action, this plan into actions, we find the challenge of the finance for implementing this action plan, and also we find some risks with overcome the traditional norms in the communities that sometimes engaging women in activities is a big challenge due to the social and traditional norms in communities. But I would say that when build enabling environment for engaging women and have them on the decision-making process and the participation of the activities, we can find them leading the change and also lead in crisis, because and we have evidence that women were on front of the crisis in each climate risk disasters happen. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panel and to everyone that asked questions. They're very interesting. As Sven mentioned at the beginning, we're going to have a little change, but it's not over. It's just going to be 3 minutes of changing the panel. So please stick around for the second part on multi-country projects and resilience. Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. Welcome everybody, and we are going to move into the second panel of the day, of this event at least, where we have 4 speakers who are sitting on both sides of me, and we're going to talk about multi-actor partnerships and how they can enhance climate and disaster risk management, finance and insurance, so CDFI and CDFI solutions in different countries and different contexts. And we have a speaker from Malawi, from Madagascar, from Germany, and from Mali to give us different perspectives on this. And after that, we'll also open up the floor for any questions from the audience. So I would like to start with with Madagascar. This is Jeremiah Fanitra. And my question from SAF FJKM in Madagascar. And my question for you is, so Madagascar is quite vulnerable to climate impacts. And often women are among those who are most impacted and most vulnerable to climate change. So what is critical in your view to strengthen the voices of women and to make sure that CDFI solutions are gender responsive and gender sensitive, and that gender is incorporated at the core of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance? Yeah, please. You can.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Madagascar is one of the 10 most vulnerable countries in terms of climate change. So we have cyclone, floods, droughts that cause poverty, migration, biodiversity loss, hunger, and food insecurity. This year has been the worst for Madagascar. We had 6 to 7 cyclones only from January to April. 2 of them have the same trajectory. So households have not the time yet to recover from the losses, and another cyclone arrived. During the catastrophe periods, women and girls are among the most vulnerable groups because of their particular and important role in the household. In some areas in Madagascar, the literacy rate is relatively low, and the girls have not the chance to go to school. In addition to that, because of the distribution of power and resource, some girls and women have not sufficient resources like land and income. In the deep south of Madagascar, which is mainly affected by drought, a large proportion of households are headed by single women with more than 5 children in charge. When the drought arrives, they have to sell their belongings and leave their fields, their houses, and with their children. Even though there is humanitarian aid, we think that it's not enough, and if the actions does not consider the gender, the woman, the risks, the action will only increase the vulnerability of women. Today, I can share 6 good practices with you to integrate, to better integrate gender consideration in CDRFI actions. The first one is women empowerment through, for example, village saving and loans associations coupled with financial education. In this way, we can increase the woman capacity to access to financial resource and to better manage the household finance. And another one is the use of positive masculinity. We can support gender champions from communities, and the use of gender disaggregated data in gender analysis and assessment, and the use of a comprehensive approach in terms of gender mainstreaming using a bottom-up strategy with respect to local culture and tradition. We have also awareness raising and capacity building to women groups to give them more confidence to speak out and to participate in decision making. And also we have also the capacity building and sharing of good experiences between actors to enhance gender mainstreaming in actions and to improve the ownership on gender policy and principles. When implementing these changes, we need to be patient and careful because years of traditions need time to evolve. But however, when women and girls' needs are well integrated, the efficiency of climate finance and actions will increase. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. By the way, I believe I didn't introduce myself. My name is Dennis. I work for Slyken Trust, and I'm based in Sri Lanka. And we are also part of the MAPS project, the multi-actor partnership project on CDRFI, and we have implemented activities in Sri Lanka. Now, I would like to hand over to Julius Ngoma, who is representing CSONEC in Malawi. And my question for you, Julius, is from your experience in Malawi, what is critical in setting up a multi-actor partnership? And especially on such a complex issue as CDRFI is, because it is a very complex thing, because we talk about climate risk, but it's not just climate risk, there are other risks compounding it and cascading, and there's a lot of different stakeholders involved. And how do you manage to give sufficient attention to the voices of civil society and to what civil society wants?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, so, yeah, thank you. So, yeah, that's a very critical question. I just want also to share that Malawi is one of those countries that are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, especially when you look at the hazards and the risks that we are actually facing, and then being amplified by the climate change. I think it's one of those critical regions or areas or countries that still need support in so many ways, especially financing in whatever form, including financing that is coming from the package on climate and disaster risk at different levels. So back to your question, there are so many things that needs to be considered when we want to actually set up a multi-actor partnership approach to deal with the issue of climate and disaster risk financing and insurance. We know that as you are this being a very new thing, one thing that needs to be considered is to ensure that you come up with a clear strategy on how you want to understand, map out the key stakeholders that can play different roles. Because we are coming from a situation, for example, in Malawi, where as a country, we've never been, actively engaging in the spaces of climate and disaster risk financing and insurance. Very few stakeholders that were aware about the processes. Very few stakeholders, including the local communities themselves that we represent, do not really understand what climate and disaster risk financing and insurance is. And then the point where everyone else was awakened about the issue, it was when government had to take an insurance policy on drought, when now everyone else started wanting to run with the whole initiative and see and understand and also implement at the same time. So one thing is to make sure that we map out the critical stakeholders that would help to advance both the policy, legal and regulatory framework of the CDRFI in the country, but also to help in the raising awareness, capacity building, and share information and engage different stakeholders. So one thing is about critical is about ensuring that we are mapping out critical stakeholders. Like in our case, we had to, after going through an experience in 2015 on drought insurance and how we didn't really come out very clearly, then we had to start to check who can be involved in the process as we are setting up the actor partnership approach. For example, we had to identify the stakeholders in the academia who can provide the critical information. We identified stakeholders in the media to actually help us to go flat out with the sharing of information on these issues. We had to come up with a list of stakeholders in the civil society that were following some of the processes and also enhance the understanding of others on the risks and the hazards, but also the youth and the women who were actually being represented at that time by different stakeholders. So all these we needed to identify them and then put them in the different committees. So the second one is to have a very formalized and the proper structure of the map itself. So for example, having a formal, all other countries of course they've gone into a step where they've just not formalized it, but at least there's a structure which you can actually recognize that this is what is representing the different stakeholders, which should have at least a steering committee, some technical working groups, depending on the needs and the wants of the country. For example, our need was to advance the policy framework, was to advance the awareness to the community. So we needed to make sure that we have committees that are also speaking about the issue of policies. They are engaging the government and the policy framework so that at least we are able to clarify it to everyone, but also raise awareness on what CDRFI is and how the local communities can also be engaged. The third one is I talked about capacity building. When you formalize the structure, you also need to make sure that everyone else is actually playing their role. If you are if you are in a steering committee, if you want to raise awareness on CDRFI, what is your role? How can you play it? So different terms of reference have to be set so that at least someone else who is playing a role should be able to understand how they can also play their role. And finally, because of time, I'll just talk about the laws and policies. So we have been able to navigate on the policy and the legal framework, engaging government, making sure that they are aware that there are gaps in the policy and legal framework that should actually recognize this issue of CDRFI, and then making sure that the MAP leadership in the country, which now is a formalized structure, is aware and also able to exchange with the government on where we need to actually strengthen our policy and legal framework on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting, I think, because it is a challenge to bring all these different stakeholders together, especially since we're talking about very diverse stakeholders, right? We talk about government and policymakers, but all the private sector, civil society, media, all the ones you mentioned. And then we have, of course, CDRFI itself, which is also very complex and where there are a lot of different instruments. And I would like to now give the floor to Mr. Nuhu Maiga, who is from the Mali Red Cross, and ask you a question about one of these instruments that we have, specifically forecast-based finance. So what is your experience in Mali with forecast-based finance, and how can it help affected populations to better deal with climate impacts and loss and damage?
Thank you very much for the invite. And as you said, I'm the Secretary General of Mali Red Cross. And let me start by explaining what the FBF is, since I assume that not everyone is familiar with this approach. It's an approach that combines predictions and pre-agreed actions. Predictions in terms of weather forecast, and sometimes it's early warning prediction, or river predictions. So we combine those with pre-arranged actions to build the resilience of the communities and And what we do is that we make sure that at the beginning we do crisis analysis to see in the country which of the crisis is the most that is likely to impact the communities. And what we did is that we did that analysis and we choose, for example, flood in Mali, because flood is the one that is occurring the most often. And we work now with the government entities because it's an initiative that's been spearheaded by the Red Cross and Red Crescent, but it is something that affects the community. So we, as auxiliary to the government, we decided to include all the departments, including the other stakeholders like the other NGOs. So we, after doing this analysis, we came up with what we call an AAP, which is an early action protocol. And the early action protocol is made on the base of the information that we get from the scientific predictions that we get from either the meteorological services or the hydrological services or the early warning system in Mali. So as we choose to work on the floodings in Mali, we work with the hydrological services, and so they gave us information, and we monitor the river. Mali has one of the longest rivers in Africa, which is the Niger River, and we monitor with them. The first thing is that we put in place committees which are made of the different entities. We have the prediction committees, which is made of the meteorological services, the hydrological services, and action committee, which is made of the health department and the social service departments. And the Red Cross is represented in all these committees. And we also have these committees, what we call the crisis committees at regional and local level, so that whenever the trigger is reached, whenever we have a threshold, then these committees will alert the higher level, so that we know that, okay, now in a week, this threshold is going to be held and the river is going to burst its bank. And what we do is usually we preposition kits in our headquarters close to the areas where the floods is likely to happen. So this way we have a lead time. For example, for this slide, we have a lead time of 4 days. When we reach the threshold that, okay, in 4 days there is going to be flood, then we start the actions by moving the kits, like emergency shelter kits, like water purification kits, and also we start by building dikes with the help of the communities, but also with the help of the government agencies that are there. So this way, we we cannot prevent the flooding to happen, but we minimize the impact of the flooding on the community, because we have already evacuated most of the people. We evacuated the communities. We evacuate also their livestock, and we also by making these decks and also by giving them sandbags, to protect their houses and the mosque. We are able to evacuate most people, for example, in the mosque or in the public infrastructures, and by doing that, what we have been able to do in Mali is that we have brought those governmental institutions that has been working in silos. We have brought them together to work together so that we can address the issue relating to the floods together, because they used to work. The meteorological service, they used to work by themselves. The hydrological service, they work by themselves. Early warning system, they work by themselves. But with that approach, that is IFRC Red Cross, International Red Cross and the Red Cross approach, we have been able to bring all these entities together to work together to address the issue. This year, only 3 weeks ago, we had one of the biggest floods in Mali since 1965. And this flood has impacted 25,000 people in one area. 25 people have been completely displaced. We have not been able to prevent the flood from happening, but we have been able to evacuate everybody. So we had no loss in terms of human being or livelihood, and we have also been able to save all their crops because the way we work with the government, they will inform in time. And then when the flood happened, 2 days after, they brought motor pumps to drain the water from the villages. And this is something that we think that has to be scaled up because we did it in a very small scale in these villages, but we knew that whatever we spend in prepositioning, in anticipating these risks, we gain more in preventing losses and damages. We gain more in saving lives and livelihoods. And from the analysis that we made, every $1 that we spent in anticipation, we can save up to $7. So I think anticipation is key. And today, what is at stake is how to mobilize more resources to help build the resilience of the population, to help them, because they already know their capacities, they know their vulnerabilities. What they need is how we can support them, to be prepared to face these situations. And I think anticipation is key, and we need all stakeholders to help the national societies and the government, to be able to strengthen the capacities of the communities so that they can prevent and minimize loss in terms of lives and livelihoods in the communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is very interesting, and I think what you said is very, very relevant, and actually connects quite well to the next question I want to ask, since you're saying people need more resources, and also you're talking about the different levels, like the local level, the regional level, the national level. And then, of course, there's the global level. And so there has been a lot of talk about the global shield. And so I would like to ask Magdalena Mierwald from the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, MCII. How do you think that the international CDFI architecture can be strengthened in order to deliver better results for those that are affected, for those that are vulnerable and most at risk? And what role can the global shield play, or even a loss and damage finance facility?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis, for this question. So climate risk have been increasing in the last couple of years, of course, because of climate change. And with this, the needs for financial protections are increasing. And with this, the CDRFI, Climate and Disaster Risk Finance and Insurance Architecture, is growing and growing. And now there are more initiatives, there are more donors, and there's also more parties that are interested in taking up comprehensive risk management strategies. And our MAPS project, Multi-Actor Partnership, is one of these initiatives. And we work on the national level, for example, in Malawi or in Madagascar, but we also work on the international level, because there's still a lot to improve in the global CDRFI architecture, especially given that the protection gap against financial losses from climate change in vulnerable 20 group countries with 20 countries is still at 98%, and it's rather getting bigger than shrinking. And there's some very clear challenges that are still out there. First one is the financing gap. So we just do not have enough resources in CDRFI to address all of these losses that we are facing. And then also a lot of projects that are being faced do not make it past the pilot phase, and these would also need much more funding. Then we have a coherence gap, because we have all of this positive increase in interest and more initiatives, more donors, but they are not, unfortunately, not very coordinated, so not doing the most efficient work that they could if they would be working together. So we need more coordination and cooperation. And then we have an ownership and subsidiarity gap, where we need approaches to be bottom-up, coming from the countries themselves, so they can take full ownership, while at the same time they need to be, the vulnerable countries need to be technically and financially supported, so they can take this ownership. There's also a couple of other gaps. So we have an anticipatory action gap. Like the colleague just said, we need to get the money very quickly to the people, so we actually need to cooperate more with the humanitarian sector to make the best out of this, the synergies. Then we have a gap in commonly applied pro-poor principles. Then we also have a protection gap against non-economic losses and slow onset events. And a big issue is also that if instruments are loan-based, it's increasing the debt risk of climate vulnerable countries, and this is nothing that we want. There has been quite a lot of talk about climate and disaster risk finance this year, ever since the G7 and the V20 have launched the Global Shield earlier this year. And we think that the Global Shield has a great potential to address many of these issues that I've just raised if it is implemented correctly. And there are still many terms of references and many details to be written out, so there's still a lot that can go really right, and there's a lot that can still go very wrong. So the first one that we need is transparency in this process. So it needs to be an open process where also civil society actors are always involved, so that we can contribute and we can also report back to the vulnerable constituency that are in the end the main beneficiaries. So of course they need to be involved. Then we need localization and a needs-based approach. This Global Shield needs to be needs-based, not donor-driven. So we should always ask the vulnerable countries what are their needs, and there's this in-country dialogue concept that I think is great if we implement it correctly. Then, of course, we need sustained, predictable, and appropriate financing, because without financing, this is just an empty initiative, and this is not what we want. But luckily enough, this COP was to a good start yesterday with the German Chancellor pledging 170 million euros for the Global Shield, and we hope that other donors are going to follow suit. Then we also need real efforts and commitment of the donors and the implementing agencies and the funding vehicles that are part of the Global Shield to not just talk to each other, but to actually cooperate and work together to be more efficient. And then we shouldn't forget that the Global Shield initiative builds on structures that are already existing, such as, for example, Insure Resilience Global Partnership. And there are many initiatives, like for example ours, that are already existing and have experience in this process. So for example, for the in-country dialogues, which are basically multi-actor partnerships, we should talk to each other, consult and learn from what we did right and what we did wrong, because we don't have to invent the wheel ever again. So we are very happy also to cooperate. So we think that the Global Shield has a great potential if we do it right. And then also we have the loss and damage a conversation, and the loss and damage finance finally got its own agenda point, which is a great achievement for CSOs and vulnerable countries have been pushing for this for so long. And we think it's important to say that climate and disaster risk finance and insurance, it's not the silver bullet against all loss and damages that are out there. So we can contribute to some things, but not to other things. And we need more loss and damage finance to cover all of the spectrum. So the Global Shield should be doing what it does best, climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. It's also open to other concepts, for example, adaptive social protection. And with the CVF and V20 special window, there's also going to be funding for more experimental approaches in loss and damage. But we need both. And I was very happy today in the morning here in the German Pavilion in the briefing that the State Secretary Flassbart also said this. The global initiative is one initiative that is timely, it's needed, but it shouldn't stop any other conversation on loss and damage. And we need more action, and we need it now, and we should all work on this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. These are very interesting perspectives, I think, and it's good to have these different case studies, to have these different experiences from around the world and to connect them. So I already saw a lot of what you said. We have experienced similarly in our work in Sri Lanka. I think there are a lot of interconnections that, as Magdalena said, a lot that can be learned also and replicated across different countries. So now I would like to open up the floor for questions or comments from the audience. We have a standing mic over there, so if you would like to say something, just maybe quickly raise your hand and you could use the mic. If there, otherwise I will ask a question, but the floor is open. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Robert Bergsvik from Wageningen University, and my question is to Magdalena. You said that there's something that could also go very wrong. What do you mean by very wrong? Like, do you have some examples or thoughts on that?
I mean, there has been a lot of critique coming from the civil society in the last couple of months leading up to now on the Global Shield. One of the main critiques being that it is supposed, like, there's a critique that it could be an initiative to take money away from a potential loss and damage financing facility. So I think comments like today from State Secretary Flaxbart that it's really complementary, taking on what is best, what it can do best, and also open up the conversation to other funding vehicles is really important. I think what could also go wrong if the funding vehicles don't really cooperate and in the end they stay exclusive in the final funding decisions. For example, we need really the World Bank with the GRIF to cooperate. They really need to open up and listen to the advice of the high-level consultative group of the Global Shield and not take their own decisions, because then it is a transparent process in the beginning, but then in the final decisions it will be exclusive. So we need the transparency all the way through. What we also need is good terms of references for all of these different parts of the Global Shield that are not yet defined, and we should always include the civil society, the vulnerable countries, back check, be open in this process, so that afterwards also there's less critique of this being something that is like done in the back room, but it's really a participatory process. I think that would it.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Are there any other questions from the audience? Anyone who would like to ask a question or share any experience? Sorry.
I think maybe I can add on what you said.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, so...
Robert.
Yes, please. You can quickly introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you all for a great presentation. Really great initiatives we see there. My name's Chris Ball from Diakoni Katastrophenhilfe, and we are engaged in different initiatives along with the Global Network for Disaster Reduction, a civil society organisation, and we're engaged in initiatives which also link with CICINEC in Malawi and also SAFEFCHKM in Madagascar. So it's great to see all of these, and we're also engaging as civil society, trying to engage more with some of these complex mechanisms which require these new financing mechanisms and structures, which you're presenting here with the Global Shield, including working on anticipatory action. So we find all this to be incredibly engaging, but just like to understand where are those entry points for civil society to engage in these discussions and these to inform and to work along with you to try to ensure that those mechanisms and things like the Global Shield do really work for and benefit those communities and actions which are happening and need to happen on the local ground. Thank you.
It's a question for Magdalena then? Or
I think it could be for others as well, including CICINEC and also to Red Cross and for Madagascar. Like how can everybody work together and we connect more as civil society to inform these mechanisms and approaches?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Who would like to...
I can start with the global level. So for the Global Shield, there has been consultation with civil society through the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership. Inter-Resilience has a high-level consultative group that also has civil society members with SLIC and Trust chairing. And so we have been consulted on all of the concept notes through the civil society chair, consulting all of us. So I think on the Global Shield, if your organization wants to be engaged, it would be good to sign up to the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership. As far as I understand, there's no strings attached. And then you're in the loop and you're consulted and you can give your comments, which are then transferred to the high-level consultative group.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's what I was... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I also want to start to respond, especially on the issue resilience part. I think at that level, then I think that's what you said. But what we're trying to do is to also ensure that we are putting up structures at national level and even at regional level that we can have as entry points to all these discussions. So I was giving you an example of a map, a national map, MAD-ACTA partnership approach for the CDRFI, where we want it to be an entry point for all these discussions at national level. But within the program, we're also trying to develop regional maps. So that at least as you, for example, if you're talking about Southern Africa as a region, or you're talking about Africa as a region, we also have that regional coordination where people can also, or institutions, civil society, and different players can also find it as an entry point to get information and get engaged on all these issues. So that's one of the things that we are trying to organize at different levels, so that at least we bring everyone into the space. Thank you.
Would you like to also add anything? Or?
I think the very purpose of the FBF, the forecast-based action, is to put the communities at the center of the disaster response. And that's why the whole thing starts with the communities to assess their capacities and their vulnerabilities, and to see how they can be supported by organization, humanitarian organization like the Red Cross, to minimize the impact of the disaster that we cannot prevent from happening. So by doing that, we're not working alone. And I started by saying that, okay, what we first started to do is to put all these government agencies together. But it's not the government agencies, because we have this huge platform which we call, for example, in Mali, we call it a disaster platform. We include not only the governmental agencies, but also the civil society organization. And we have more than 98 organizations that is in this platform. So they all work together to make sure that communities has the capacities, and they know their vulnerabilities, and they have the capacity to address the issue when it's happened. So I think it's not just an entry point. It's because the civil society is part of, and parcel of this risk reduction management.
To add up to what Julius said, for the multi-actor partnership in Madagascar, we can take the example of the climate insurance, for example, at the local level. We have the climate micro insurance. For example, for the civil society, we can take part in raising awareness about insurance culture among the communities, because in Madagascar, the risk culture is very low. So some people doesn't understand what insurance means. They sometimes confused it with the classic assistance, cash transfer, and food assistance. And at a more meso and macro level, for example, with the African risk capacity, civil society can participate in high-level advocacy, capacity buildings of public actors, for example, to increase the amount of the premiums that the state pay to the African risk capacity, so that the payout will be able to cover a lot of activities to compensate for the losses and damages to the affected population.
Thank you. So yeah, I think these are all points that come well together. And I think what we have highlighted, what the panelists have highlighted throughout the discussion, is that there's a need to build capacities, to create more awareness, and also to have evidence and evidence-based actions. And if we set up a multi-actor partnership, if we set up a mechanism to showcase what is the needs, what is actually needed, but also what is working, what can be a mechanism to deliver and address these needs. If it's anticipatory action, if it's insurance, if it's social protection, there are different mechanisms that all can play a role in this. And I think it's a lot of different stakeholders have a part that they can play in this. It can be government stakeholders, it can be the private sector, it can be civil society, it can be communities on the ground who all play a role. And I think we have the different countries, we have more countries that were part of this project also, that have all produced a body of evidence that can contribute to national and international processes and be feeding into the university space. For example, from Sri Lanka, if you're interested, we have some publications, some knowledge products. My colleague Ashan over there can, if you're interested, just go up to him. He has some of them with him. I'm sure other organizations will have as well things to share on your homepages or in physical form. So yeah, with this I would wrap up this panel since we're out of time. And I think hand it over to Sven again to give closing remarks or not. I can also close. Then actually we might have one more question time, maybe not. So maybe then we can wrap up this. One quick question.
Can we also touch upon, like, isn't it also a bit of a problem that there now needs to be capacity building to learn about how parametric insurance works when that's a very like I also try to understand how these works, and it's very complicated. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and when financing can also come in the form of just grants like they used to in climate finance. If you can touch upon that.
Does anyone want to respond to this? I mean, from my side, I would say definitely it shouldn't be all about parametric insurance. It's one tool amongst many, and it has a function, I think, to play, but it's certainly not for every case and in every context. But I think the idea for parametric insurance is that it actually makes it easier for people on the ground to understand what is happening, because it's less complicated in a way than indemnity-based insurance, because it's tied to an index, and once the index is reached, it pays out. So it's relatively straightforward in that sense. But yeah, if anyone wants to come in on this.
Yeah,
Julius.
Yeah, so from the experience that we have, I think we noted that those challenges in terms of how people understand the whole issue about insurance and the different mechanisms of insurance, and this is one issue that we had to take it, for example, from our experience, to take it seriously in terms of building the capacity of the different stakeholders to understand what all these insurance mean, and also how, for example, different stakeholders can come in terms of feeding back into, for example, designing of some of the products, because part of the project that we're doing was also to understand what products are there, CDRFI products are there, which includes the national level and even the regional risk pools, which I think my colleague also talked about, the Africa risk capacity, so that everyone else understand from that regional level what kind of mechanisms are there in terms of insurance, what type of insurance is there. But it's not an easy thing, but also to advocate that these mechanisms are taking on board what the local communities wants or needs. Also, not to ensure that we are exploiting the communities is one thing that we also want to address. But it's a very complex thing. It's a one-to-one. For example, when we're setting up the map that I talked about, we also needed to come up with a clear, a separate committee that can help to educate the different stakeholders on what these insurance mean to the community, and how they can also, the communities can also feed into that. And at the end of the day, how best, for example, if the payouts are being given, how people are going to be supported so that there's no outcry, like the way we've seen some of the insurance mechanisms are playing out. Thank you.
Thank you. So with this, I think we are at the end of this event. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to all the panelists of this panel and the first panel, and also to CARE and German Watch for organizing this, as well as, of course, to the German Pavilion for hosting this event and giving the space to talk about this, because it is an important topic, and it's a conversation that will, I think, occupy us for a longer time. Specifically, this conversation also we are going to continue on the 16th of November in the V20 Pavilion, which is all the way over there in the third hall, I believe. And that will be on the 16th from 10:30 to 12 on improving disaster risk finance in climate vulnerable countries through civil society engagement. And you'll see a lot of the same speakers, so we can continue this conversation and go more in depth on some aspects. And so I hope to see you there, and also in other side events and conversations we're having. And please check out our knowledge products from all the organizations involved. There's a lot of learnings that we had from this project and that we're going to continue to disseminate and make available to people. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.